The shuttle broke through the final layer of atmosphere, and Jiho felt his stomach settle as artificial gravity took over. Through the viewport he could see it, Lumina Threshold. The station hung in space like a crystal flower, its petals spreading outward in perfect geometric patterns. Each petal housed a different species, a different culture, a different way of thinking, and somewhere in that massive structure, 12 alien races waited to judge humanity. "Captain, we're being hailed," Hana said from the seat beside him. She was trying to sound calm, but Jiho could hear the tension in her voice. He didn't blame her. This was the moment Earth had been waiting for. 50 years of watching from the shadows, of being observed by alien civilizations that could cross the stars while humanity was still struggling to reach Mars. 50 years of wondering if they would ever be invited to join. Now they had their invitation. Now they had to prove they belonged. Jiho straightened his uniform and nodded to the pilot. "Accept it." The view screen flickered and a face appeared. Jiho had studied the images, read all the briefing materials, but nothing prepared him for seeing an Ethrin in real time. Velrith was beautiful in a way that made his brain struggle to process. Her skin seemed to shift between silver and pale blue, and her eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle on her face, glowed with soft light. She wore no clothing, but somehow that seemed natural, appropriate. Her body was covered in patterns that moved and changed like living tattoos. "Welcome, humans," Velrith said, and Jiho heard her voice both through the speakers and somehow, impossibly, inside his head. "I am Ambassador Velrith of the Ethrin. The Galactic Concordat greets you in peace and curiosity." Jiho forced himself to respond. "Thank you, Ambassador. I am Captain Jiho of Earth. We are honored to be here." The docking process took another 20 minutes. Jiho used the time to review the mission parameters one more time, though he had them memorized. Humanity was being offered provisional membership in the Concordat. They would gain access to faster-than-light travel, advanced medicine, and trade with 12 different civilizations. In return, Earth would need to prove that humans could coexist peacefully with telepathic species. That was the catch. Every single species in the Concordat was telepathic. They could read thoughts, share emotions, communicate without words. It was so fundamental to their society that they barely understood how humanity had developed complex civilization without it. To them, humans were mind-blind, fumbling in the dark, somehow managing to survive despite their handicap. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. Jiho stood adjusting his uniform one more time. Behind him, the rest of the delegation prepared themselves. Hana, their xenopsychologist who had spent years studying alien communication, Doyen, their trade negotiator, sharp and clever with numbers, and Yunji, their security chief, whose job was to keep them all alive if things went wrong. They didn't speak as the airlock cycled. There was nothing left to say. They had trained for this, prepared for every scenario Earth's best minds could imagine. Now they just had to do it. The door opened and they stepped into another world. The receiving hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. The walls were alive with color, shifting and flowing in patterns that might have been decoration or might have been some form of alien writing. In the center of the room stood a group of beings, and Jiho's brain stuttered trying to take them all in at once. Velrith stood at the front, tall and elegant. Beside her was something that looked like a floating crystal, refracting light into rainbow patterns. Behind them, a being made of what seemed like living shadows, and another that resembled a collection of tentacles arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape. There were others more than Jiho could count in that first overwhelming moment. "Come forward," Velrith said, her voice gentle. "Do not be afraid. We mean you no harm." Jiho walked forward, his team following behind him. He kept his face neutral, professional even as his mind raced. Were they reading his thoughts right now? Could they see his nervousness, his fear, his desperate hope that this mission would succeed? The briefings had been unclear on exactly how telepathy worked. Some species could only sense emotions, others could hear surface thoughts. The Etherins were supposed to be the most powerful, but even Earth's experts didn't know the full extent of their abilities. "Captain Jiho," Velrith said, stepping forward. She moved with impossible grace, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground. "We have much to discuss. Your species has been observed for many cycles, and the Concordat has decided that humanity shows promise. But there is much we do not understand about your kind, much that concerns us. We're here to answer any questions you might have," Jiho said. He was thinking about the speech he had prepared, the careful diplomatic phrases Earth's government had written for him. But he was also thinking about whether he had turned off the coffee maker in his apartment before he left Earth. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he was wondering if his daughter had gotten his message, if she was watching this moment from Earth, if she was proud of him. Velrith tilted her head and something changed in her expression. It was subtle, but Jiho caught it, a moment of surprise or maybe confusion, the crystal being made a sound like wind chimes, the shadow being rippled. Other members of the welcome party shifted, their attention focusing on the humans with new intensity. "Your thoughts," Velrith said slowly, "are very loud." Jiho felt ice in his stomach. "I'm sorry, No," Velrith interrupted. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel warmth radiating from her silver-blue skin. Her 3 eyes locked onto his face, and Jiho felt suddenly naked, exposed, like she could see straight through him into places he didn't want anyone to see. Then she leaned in, and her voice became a whisper that existed only in his mind. "Careful, human. I sense every thought." Jiho froze. Behind him, he heard Hana take a sharp breath. Doyun made a small noise of surprise. Only Yunji remained perfectly still, but Jiho knew her well enough to recognize the tension in her silence. Velrith stepped back, and her public voice returned, warm and welcoming. "Come, we have prepared quarters for you. Tomorrow we will begin the formal proceedings. Tonight rest, adjust to our station, and try not to think too loudly." She smiled, and Jiho couldn't tell if it was friendly or threatening. The welcome party dispersed, leaving the humans standing in the vast hall with a small, insectoid being who introduced itself as their guide. As they followed it through gleaming corridors, none of them spoke. They didn't dare, because if Velrith could hear Jiho's thoughts about coffee makers and daughters, what else could she hear? What else could all of them hear? In his mind, Jiho tried to think about nothing. He tried to make his thoughts blank and empty and quiet. But the more he tried, the more his brain filled with noise, worries and fears and questions and memories all tumbling over each other in chaotic waves. And somewhere in the station, Jiho was certain Velrith was listening to every single one. The quarters they had been assigned were beautiful in an alien way. The walls curved smoothly into the ceiling, and soft light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The furniture adjusted itself when they sat down, conforming to their bodies in a way that should have been comfortable, but instead felt unsettling. Everything was too perfect, too smooth, too alien. Jiho stood in the center of the main room and looked at his team. They looked back at him, and he could see his own worry reflected in their faces. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They had been warned that their quarters might not be private, that telepathic species had different concepts of privacy than humans did. Finally, Hana broke the silence. "We need to talk about what happened." "Not here," Yunji said immediately. She was already moving around the room, her eyes scanning the walls and ceiling. "There might be sensors, cameras, or worse." "Worse?" Doyun asked. He had collapsed into one of the alien chairs and was rubbing his temples. "What's worse than cameras?" "Telepaths," Yunji said flatly. "Hana, you're the expert. Can they listen to us through walls?" Hana bit her lip. "I don't know." The research was inconclusive. Some telepathic species need line of sight. Others can sense thoughts from a distance. The Etherans are supposed to be the most powerful. But even our best information is just guesswork. We've never had direct contact before. "Great," Doyun muttered. "So we're flying blind." "We've always been flying blind," Jiho said. He moved to the window, or what he assumed was a window, though it might have been a screen, and looked out at the stars. "Earth sent us here knowing we'd be at a disadvantage. The question is what we do about it. Can we even do anything?" Doyun asked. "If they can read our minds, then every strategy we come up with, every plan we make, they'll know about it before we even try it." "Maybe," Hana said slowly. She was pacing now, her scientific mind clearly working through the problem. "But did you notice how Velrith reacted?" She seemed surprised. She said our thoughts were loud. "Loud?" Yunji repeated. "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure," Hana admitted. "But think about it. Telepathic species evolved with telepathy. They're used to sensing thoughts. But human thoughts, maybe they're different somehow. Maybe we're not what they expected." Jiho turned away from the window. "Different how?" "I don't know. Hana said, frustration creeping into her voice. I need more data. I need to observe how they interact with us, see how they react to human thought patterns. But that takes time, and we don't have time, Jiho finished. The formal negotiations start tomorrow. We need answers now. They fell silent again. Jiho could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Billions of people on Earth were counting on this mission. Humanity's entire future in the galaxy depended on what happened in the next few days, and they were walking into it blind and exposed, their every thought potentially visible to the aliens around them. I have an idea, Doyen said suddenly, but it's risky. Everyone turned to look at him. We need to test their limits, Doyen continued. Figure out exactly what they can and can't sense. And we need to do it before the official negotiations begin. How? Yunji asked. Someone volunteers to meet with one of them. Privately. And during the meeting, that person deliberately thinks about specific things. We vary the content, the intensity, the subject matter. See what gets a reaction and what doesn't. That's dangerous, Hana said. If they realize we're testing them, then we apologize and say we were trying to understand their abilities better. Doyen interrupted. We're the new species, remember? We're supposed to be curious and a little clumsy. They'll expect us to make mistakes. Jiho considered it. It was risky, but Doyen was right. They needed information. Who volunteers? I'll do it, Doyen said immediately. I'm the trade negotiator. It makes sense for me to want to meet with someone about preliminary economic discussions. It's a legitimate reason for a private meeting. Are you sure? Jiho asked. Doyen smiled, but there was no humor in it. No, but someone has to do it, and I'm the best choice. Hana needs to stay objective to analyze the results. Yunji is our security, we can't risk her. And you're the captain. If this goes wrong, you need to be able to claim ignorance. Jiho didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with the logic. All right. Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning, before the official proceedings. Someone low-level, not Velrith. We don't want to tip our hand to their leadership yet. The rest of the night passed slowly. They tried to sleep, but the alien quarters felt wrong and everyone's minds were too full of worry. Jiho lay in his assigned room, staring at the ceiling that glowed with soft bioluminescence and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Velrith's voice in his head. Careful, human. I sense every thought. Morning came, or at least the station's lights brightened to indicate the start of a new cycle. Jiho never figured out if there was a real day-night cycle on Lumina Threshold. Time felt strange here, disconnected from Earth's familiar rhythms. Doyen's meeting was scheduled for 2 hours before the formal negotiations. The contact was named Rael, a young Ethran who worked in the Economic Coordination Office. Jiho, Hana, and Yunji waited in their quarters while Doyen went to meet him, each of them lost in their own thoughts. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. After an hour, Hana started pacing again. He should be back by now. The meeting was only supposed to last 30 minutes. Give him time, Yunji said, though she looked tense too. Another 15 minutes crawled by. Then the door opened and Doyen stumbled in. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His hands were shaking. What happened? Jiho demanded, moving to support him. It worked, Doyen said, his voice hoarse. God help me, it worked. But Jiho, we're in trouble. Real trouble. Explain, Jiho ordered, guiding Doyen to a chair. Doyen took a deep breath, steadying himself. I did what we discussed. During the meeting, I deliberately thought about random things. Childhood memories, songs, mathematical equations, all at the same time while I was talking about trade agreements. And? Hana prompted. He could hear all of it, Doyen said. Every single thought. But here's the thing, he couldn't handle it. I could see him getting more and more distressed. His skin started changing colors, these patterns moving faster and faster. He kept asking me to slow down, to think more clearly. But I wasn't trying to think fast. That's just how human minds work. What do you mean? Yunji asked. We think about multiple things at once, Doyen explained. All the time. It's normal for us. But for them, for telepathic species, I think their thoughts are more linear, more orderly. When they communicate mentally, they're probably sharing one clear thought at a time. But humans? We're chaos. Our minds are running 10 different tracks simultaneously, full of memories and emotions and random noise. Hana's eyes widened. That's why Velrith said we were loud. Not because we think strongly, but because we think messily. Exactly, Doyen said, and Rael couldn't handle it. After about 20 minutes, he ended the meeting. He looked sick. I think I actually hurt him, just by thinking normally. Jiho felt something cold settle in his chest. If our normal thought patterns are painful to them, then we're not just at a disadvantage, Yunji finished grimly. We're a weapon, and they know it. The council chamber made the receiving hall look small. It was a massive sphere, with the delegates seated on platforms that floated at different heights and angles throughout the space. At the center hung a glowing orb that Hana whispered was some kind of translation device, though Jiho suspected it did more than just translate words. The whole room hummed with a sound he felt more than heard, like standing next to a power generator. Jiho and his team were given a platform near the middle height, which Hana said probably meant they were being treated as equals rather than supplicants. That was good. It meant the Concordat was at least pretending to respect humanity. Around them, the council members took their places. Jiho tried to catalog them all, but there were too many, and some of them hurt to look at directly. The crystal being from yesterday refracted light in ways that made his eyes water. A creature made of what looked like flowing water kept shifting its shape. There were others that seemed more solid. Insectoid creatures, beings covered in fur or scales, something that looked almost plant-like, and everywhere, the Etherans. There were 5 of them scattered around the chamber, their silver-blue skin glowing softly in the strange light. Velrith sat on the highest platform, her position marking her as the leader of this gathering. We call this council to order. Velrith's voice resonated through the chamber, both in the air and in Jiho's mind. Today we welcome the humans of Earth, who seek full membership in the Galactic Concordat. Captain Jiho will speak for his species. Jiho stood. His platform moved slightly under his feet, adjusting to keep him balanced. He had rehearsed this speech 100 times, but now, with dozens of alien minds potentially watching his thoughts, the words felt clumsy and inadequate. Honored members of the Concordat, he began, humanity thanks you for this opportunity. We know we are different from you. We know our minds work in ways you find strange, but we believe that diversity makes a civilization stronger, not weaker. We hope to prove that humans can be valuable members of your alliance. As he spoke, Jiho felt it happening again, his mind wandering despite his best efforts to focus. He was thinking about the speech, yes, but he was also thinking about how strange it was that his voice echoed in this chamber, wondering if Earth was watching this broadcast. Remembering his daughter asking him why aliens would want to talk to humans, feeling nervous about whether he was standing correctly, noticing that one of the insectoid creatures was clicking its mandibles in what might have been agitation. Around the chamber, Jiho saw reactions. Small movements, subtle changes in posture or color, the water being rippled more intensely. The plant-like creature's leaves rustled, and the insectoid, the one Velrith had called Counselor Vex, was definitely agitated now, its whole body vibrating with what looked like distress. Captain Jiho. Vex's voice came through the translation orb, high-pitched and clicking. Your mind is very active. It is difficult to follow your words when your thoughts scatter in so many directions. Jiho felt heat rise to his face. I apologize, Counselor. I'm not doing it intentionally. This is simply how humans think. All humans? Another voice asked. This one came from a being that looked like animated shadow. Or just you? All of us. Hana spoke up from beside Jiho. Human cognitive architecture is fundamentally different from telepathic species. Our thoughts are not linear. We process multiple streams of information simultaneously. How do you communicate with each other? The shadow being asked, sounding genuinely curious. How do you coordinate if your minds are always in such chaos? We use words, Jiho said. Spoken language. Written language. We can't share thoughts directly, so we have to translate our internal experiences into external symbols that others can interpret. How inefficient, Vex clicked. How do you trust each other if you cannot see into each other's minds? We build trust through actions, Yunji said. Through time and shared experiences, through keeping our promises. But you could lie, Vex insisted. You could think one thing and say another. How do you know when someone is being honest? We don't always know, Jiho admitted. Sometimes people do lie. Sometimes they say things they don't mean. We've had to develop other ways of reading each other. Body language, tone of voice, patterns of behavior over time. The council chamber filled with a sound like wind through trees. Jiho realized it was multiple species talking among themselves, though Whether telepathically or aloud, he couldn't tell. "This is fascinating," Velrith said, her voice cutting through the noise. "But it brings us to the central concern. Captain Jiho, humanity seeks full membership in the Concordat. This would grant you access to our technology, our trade networks, our knowledge. But it would also require humans to live and work alongside telepathic species. Given the incompatibility between human thought patterns and telepathic sensing, how can we be certain this will not cause harm to both sides?" Jiho opened his mouth to answer, but his mind was already racing ahead. He was thinking about possible responses, weighing diplomatic phrasing against honest answers. He was thinking about Earth's desperate need for FTL technology, about the fact that humanity was still confined to one star system while every other species could cross the galaxy. He was thinking about Doyen's experiment with Rael, about how human thoughts had caused the young Ethran actual distress. And underneath all of that, quieter but persistent, he was thinking about his daughter again, remembering when she was 5 and asked him why people couldn't just say what they meant. Remembering trying to explain that sometimes the truth was complicated, that people had feelings they couldn't put into words. Around the chamber, more reactions. The water being was churning now, its form becoming turbulent. Several of the delegates had turned away from the human platform, as if looking at them directly was too intense. Even Velrith's expression had changed, her 3 eyes showing what might have been concern. "You are doing it again," Vex said, his clicking voice sharp with distress. "Your mind splinters in a dozen directions while you stand silent. It is disturbing." "I'm sorry," Jiho said, and he meant it. "I don't know how to make my thoughts quieter. I don't know how to think the way you need me to think. Perhaps that is the problem," the shadow being said. "Perhaps humans are simply too different. Perhaps this integration is impossible." "No," Velrith said firmly. She stood on her platform and all attention shifted to her. "The humans are not deceptive by nature. They are simply complex, perhaps dangerously so. But the Concordat was founded on the principle that diverse minds make us stronger. Diverse minds that can communicate," Vex countered. "These humans, we cannot read them cleanly. Their thoughts are like static, like noise that drowns out clarity. How can we work together if we cannot understand each other?" "We learn," Hana said. She had stood too now, her voice steady despite the fear Jiho could see in her eyes. "Telepathic species learn to work together despite having different forms of telepathy. Some of you sense emotions, others hear words, others share images. You learn to bridge those differences. Humans are just one more bridge to build." "A bridge made of chaos," Vex muttered. "Maybe," Jiho said. "But chaos isn't always bad. Sometimes it's creative. Sometimes it's adaptive. Sometimes it's exactly what you need when everything else is too ordered, too predictable." He wasn't sure where those words came from. They weren't in his prepared speech. But they felt true, and for a moment his mind actually quieted, focused on that one idea. Velrith tilted her head, studying him. "An interesting perspective, Captain. The Council will need time to deliberate on this matter. We will adjourn for now." The platforms began to move, carrying delegates toward the exits. Jiho felt his own platform descending toward the floor. As they touched down, he saw Velrith approaching, moving against the flow of departing council members. "Captain Jiho," she said quietly, "I would like to speak with you privately. Just you, if your team can spare you." Jiho glanced at Hana, who nodded slightly. It wasn't like they could refuse. "Of course, Ambassador," Jiho said. Velrith gestured toward a door that Jiho hadn't noticed before. "Follow me. We have much to discuss." The garden was impossible. That was Jiho's first thought as he followed Velrith through the doorway. They were on a space station surrounded by vacuum and radiation. And yet here was a garden full of plants he had never seen before. Trees with silver leaves that chimed softly in a breeze that shouldn't exist. Flowers that glowed with their own light. Streams of water that flowed upward before falling back down in gentle curves that defied gravity. "This is my private sanctuary," Velrith said, gliding along a path made of something that looked like polished bone. "A place where I can think without the constant presence of other minds. Even telepaths need silence sometimes." Jiho followed her, trying not to stare at everything around him. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Velrith stopped beside one of the upward-flowing streams and turned to face him. In the strange light of the glowing plants, her silver-blue skin seemed to shimmer with patterns he hadn't noticed before. "I brought you here because we need to speak honestly, Captain. Away from the Council. Away from your team. Away from all the diplomatic masks we wear. All right, Jiho said cautiously. Tell me, Captain, what do you know about why the Concordat exists? Jiho blinked at the sudden question. The briefing material said it was formed 2,000 years ago to promote peace and cooperation among telepathic species. That is the simple answer, Velrith said. The answer we give to children and to outsiders. But the truth is more complicated. The Concordat exists because telepathic species are fundamentally vulnerable. We can read each other's thoughts, yes. We can share emotions and intentions. This makes us good at cooperation. But it also means we have no defense against minds that wish us harm. She gestured, and the water stream beside them changed direction, flowing horizontally through the air between them. In its surface, images began to form. Scenes of alien civilizations, of war and destruction. 5,000 years ago, there were hundreds of telepathic species in this galaxy, Velrith continued. Now there are 12. The others were destroyed by the Void Collective. The Void Collective? Jiho repeated. Earth's intelligence had heard rumors of something called the Void, but details were scarce. A hive mind, Velrith said, and her voice held an emotion Jiho recognized, fear. Billions of individuals thinking as one. They move through the galaxy, finding telepathic species and assimilating them. They are perfect unity, perfect coordination. When they attack, they do not use weapons first. They use their minds. They reach out to telepathic beings and simply absorb them. The images in the water showed beings screaming, their bodies going rigid as something invaded their thoughts, showed cities falling silent as entire populations were consumed by the collective's unified consciousness. How do they do it? Jiho asked, unable to look away from the terrible images. Telepathic species evolved to share thoughts, Velrith explained. We are open to each other by nature. It is how we communicate, how we bond, how we build trust. But that openness is also a weakness. The Void Collective exploits it. They overwhelm telepathic minds with their unity, their absolute certainty. Telepaths feel the collective's thoughts like a flood, washing away their individual consciousness. They become part of the hive, adding their knowledge and abilities to its strength. The water stream returned to its normal flow, the images fading. Velrith looked at Jiho with her 3 eyes, and he saw exhaustion there, ancient and deep. The 12 species that form the Concordat are all that remain, she said. We survive by staying together, by combining our different forms of telepathy into a defense. But the Void Collective grows stronger with each species they assimilate. It is only a matter of time before they come for us again. Jiho felt cold despite the warm air of the garden. And you think humans can help somehow? I know you can, Velrith said. Captain, do you understand what happened in the council chamber today? Counselor Vex was not simply annoyed by your thoughts. He was in pain. The water-bearer, Counselor Thus, nearly lost cohesion because your mind overwhelmed his ability to maintain his form. Even I, with centuries of experience and the strongest telepathic abilities of my species, found your thoughts difficult to process. I'm sorry. Do not apologize, Velrith interrupted. You misunderstand. This is not a criticism. It is a revelation. Captain, when I look into your mind, do you know what I see? Jiho shook his head. Chaos, Velrith said. Beautiful, terrible chaos. You think in fragments and contradictions. You believe things and doubt them simultaneously. You remember the past while imagining the future while experiencing the present all at once. You lie to yourself constantly, telling yourself you are calm when you are afraid, brave when you are terrified. Your mind is a storm of conflicting impulses and competing narratives. That sounds bad, Jiho said weakly. It should be, Velrith agreed. By every principle of telepathic psychology, minds like yours should be dysfunctional. You should be unable to make decisions, unable to act, paralyzed by your own internal contradictions. But you are not. Somehow you function. Somehow you thrive. And that chaos, that impossible, illogical chaos, makes you incomprehensible. She stepped closer, and Jiho fought the urge to step back. Even I cannot fully map your thoughts, Captain, Velrith said quietly. I can sense the surface, your immediate emotions, your strongest reactions. But beneath that is layer upon layer of contradictory thoughts, buried memories, unconscious patterns. You are opaque to me in a way no telepathic mind has ever been. And if I, with all my power and training, cannot read you clearly, then maybe the Void Collective can't either. Jiho finished, understanding dawning. Precisely, Velrith said. The collective operates through perfect unity. Every mind thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same purpose. But human minds, you are already chaos. You are already divided against yourselves. How does a hive mind assimilate a consciousness that cannot even agree with itself? Jiho's thoughts were racing now. Multiple tracks of realization and fear and hope all tangled together. You want us to fight them. That's what this is really about. Not membership in the Concordat. You need us as weapons. I need you as allies, Velrith corrected. The Void Collective has not attacked Concordat space for 200 years, but our intelligence suggests they are preparing for another assault. When they come, telepathic species will be vulnerable. We need minds that the Collective cannot simply consume. We need warriors who can face them without losing themselves to the hive. But we don't know if it would work, Jiho protested. Everything you've said is theory. We've never even seen the Void Collective. What if human minds are just as vulnerable as telepathic ones? What if they are not? Velrith countered. What if humanity is the key to survival for every sentient being in this region of the galaxy? Can you afford not to try? Jiho turned away from her, staring at one of the glowing flowers without really seeing it. His mind was doing exactly what Velrith had described, spinning in a dozen directions at once. He was thinking about Earth's desperate need for advanced technology, about the risk of committing humanity to a war they didn't understand. He was thinking about the billions of lives in the Concordat, about whether humans had any moral obligation to protect aliens they just met. He was thinking about his daughter, about the future she would inherit depending on what he decided right now. And underneath all of that, quieter but growing stronger, was anger. Anger at being manipulated, at Earth being invited to join the Concordat under false pretenses. They didn't want humans as equals. They wanted them as shields. You should have told us this from the beginning, he said, not turning around. If we had, would Earth have sent you? Velrith asked. Would humanity have agreed to come here if we had said, join us and fight an enemy that has destroyed hundreds of civilizations? She had a point. Jiho knew Earth's government. They would have seen it as a trap, a way to use humanity as cannon fodder in someone else's war. I cannot force you to help us, Velrith said, but I am asking. The Concordat will grant humanity full membership regardless of your answer. You will have access to all our knowledge, all our technology. We will honor our agreements. But I am asking you personally, Captain Jiho. When the Void Collective comes, will humanity stand with us? Jiho turned back to face her. His mind was still chaos. Fear and hope and anger and duty all mixed together in a tangled mess that would probably give Velrith a headache just listening to it. But somewhere in that chaos he found clarity. I can't answer for all of humanity, he said. I'm just one person. One captain. I can't commit my species to a war. I know, Velrith said softly. But I can tell you this, Jiho continued. Humans are good at chaos. We're good at fighting when everything is confused and terrible and nothing makes sense. If the Void Collective comes, if they threaten people we've come to know and care about, I think humans will fight. Not because we've decided to, not because we've carefully weighed the strategic advantages, but because we can't help ourselves. Because that's what humans do when things get bad. We fight. Velrith smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it looked genuinely warm. That chaos, Captain. That beautiful, terrible chaos. That is exactly what I was hoping to hear. 3 weeks after the council meeting, the first military transport arrived from Earth. Jiho watched through the observation window as the ships docked with Lumina Threshold, bulky, crude vessels that looked primitive next to the elegant alien craft already berthed at the station. But they carried something the Concordat didn't have, soldiers who couldn't be read like open books. Commander Minho was the first off the transport. He was shorter than Jiho, stockier, with scars on his hands and a face that had seen too much combat. He saluted with mechanical precision, but his eyes were already scanning the docking bay, assessing threats, looking for exits. Commander, Jiho said, returning the salute. Welcome to Lumina Threshold, Captain, Minho replied. His voice was flat, professional. My people are ready for deployment. Just tell us who we're fighting. Jiho had forgotten how different military personnel were from diplomats. No small talk, no careful phrasing. Just direct questions expecting direct answers. It's complicated, Jiho said. Come with me. We have a lot to brief you on. Over the next few days, Jiho and his team explained the situation to Minho and his officers. The Void Collective, the vulnerability of telepathic species, the theory that human minds might be resistant to hive mind assimilation. With each briefing, Jiho watched the soldiers' expressions shift from skepticism to grim acceptance. "So we're here to be lab rats," one of Minho's lieutenants said bluntly. "Test subjects to see if the Void can eat our brains or not." "We're here to help our allies," Minho corrected. But his tone suggested he didn't entirely disagree with the assessment. The real problem started when the soldiers began moving through the station. They had been warned about telepathy, briefed on how to interact with alien species. But knowing about something intellectually and experiencing it were very different things. Jiho was in a planning meeting with Velrith and several concordant military leaders. When they got the first emergency call, a junior Ethran diplomat named Rael, the same one Doyen had accidentally overwhelmed weeks ago, had collapsed after passing 2 human soldiers in a corridor. The soldiers hadn't done anything threatening. They had simply been walking and talking, laughing about some shared joke. But their minds, it was like being hit by a wave, Rael said later once he had recovered enough to speak. He was in the medical bay, his silver blue skin pale and his 3 eyes unfocused. Their thoughts were so violent, so aggressive. Images of combat, of death. And underneath that, this horrible humor, this darkness. How can beings think such things and still function? "They're soldiers," Hana explained gently. She had come to check on Rael, concerned about the incident. "They've seen combat. They've experienced trauma. Those thoughts are how they cope with what they've lived through." "But they were laughing," Rael said, confused and disturbed. "Thinking about terrible things and laughing." "Dark humor," Hana said. "It's a survival mechanism. Humans joke about the things that scare them. It helps them process fear and trauma." Rael just shook his head, unable to comprehend it. There were more incidents over the following days. A group of insectoid diplomats refused to enter rooms where human soldiers were present. The water-bearer, Counselor Thas, had to leave a joint planning session because the presence of Commander Minho made it impossible for him to maintain cohesion. Even Velrith admitted that spending extended time around the military personnel was exhausting in a way that the diplomatic team had not been. "Your soldiers are different from you," she told Jiho during one of their private meetings. "The violence in their thoughts is more prominent. The darkness is closer to the surface. They're trained for combat," Jiho said. "Their minds are prepared for violence because that's their job. But they're still human. They still have the same chaotic thought patterns as the rest of us, just shaped by different experiences." It was Hana who first suggested weaponizing the effect. They were having dinner in the human quarters, real food from Earth shipped in the transport along with the soldiers. It was comforting to eat something familiar while surrounded by so much strangeness. "We know human thoughts overwhelm telepaths," Hana said, pushing noodles around her plate. "We've seen it happen multiple times now. What if we deliberately train humans to project that overwhelming mental noise?" Doyen paused mid-bite. "You mean use our thoughts as weapons?" "Not weapons exactly," Hana said. "More like countermeasures. If the Void Collective attacks telepathically, human minds might not just resist, they might actively disrupt the hive mind's coordination." Yunji leaned forward, interested. "How would that even work?" "I'm not sure," Hana admitted. "But think about what happened with Rael and the soldiers. They weren't trying to hurt him. They were just thinking normally. What if we trained humans to deliberately amplify that effect? To consciously recall traumatic memories, to layer multiple conflicting thoughts, to generate maximum cognitive noise?" "That sounds psychologically dangerous," Jiho said. "It is," Hana agreed. "I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm saying it might be necessary. If the Void Collective attacks, we need every advantage we can get." The proposal went up through channels to Earth Command and the Concordant leadership. Both sides approved, though for different reasons. Earth saw it as a way to prove humanity's value to the Alliance. The Concordant saw it as a potential defense against their greatest enemy. Training began 2 days later. Jiho observed the first session from behind a protective barrier. On one side were 5 human soldiers, including Commander Minho. On the other side, separated by empty space, were 3 Concordant volunteers, all telepaths, all experienced military personnel from different species. "The goal is simple," the training coordinator explained. She was an Ethran named Sora, one of the few who could tolerate prolonged exposure to human thoughts. Humans will attempt to project their mental processes at maximum intensity. Telepaths will attempt to resist and maintain their cognitive function. What are we supposed to think about? One of the soldiers asked. Whatever generates the strongest mental signal, Sora said. Strong emotions, traumatic memories, complex thoughts. Try different approaches and see what has the most effect. The training began. Jiho watched as the soldiers closed their eyes, concentrating. At first, nothing visible happened. Then the telepaths began to react. The insectoid's mandibles clattered rapidly. The plant being's leaves rustled in agitation. The Ethran volunteer, Sora's assistant, stumbled backward, his skin flashing through a rapid sequence of colors. What are you thinking about? Sora called to Minho. My unit, Minho said, his eyes still closed, his voice strained. The one that got ambushed in the Tehran operation. I'm thinking about finding them. About what was left of them. Every detail. The smells. The sounds. And I'm also thinking about my daughter's birthday party last year. And the recipe for my grandmother's soup. And counting backward from 1,000 by sevens. The Ethran volunteer collapsed. The insectoid made a high-pitched keening sound and scuttled away from the training area. Only the plant being managed to remain standing, though its leaves were drooping. Stop, Sora commanded. That's enough for today. The session ended, but the training continued over the following weeks. The soldiers learned to control their mental projection, to amplify it or reduce it as needed. They discovered that certain types of thoughts were more disruptive than others. Traumatic memories were powerful but hard to sustain. Emotional contradictions, thinking about love and hate simultaneously, fear and courage, joy and sorrow, created confusing signals that telepaths found particularly difficult to process. The soldiers also discovered that it hurt. Deliberately dredging up trauma, forcing yourself to think about the worst moments of your life, maintaining that mental state for extended periods, it took a psychological toll. After training sessions, soldiers would be quiet, withdrawn, sometimes shaking. Hana insisted on mandatory counseling sessions, but she could see the damage accumulating. We're weaponizing their pain, she told Jiho one night. We're teaching them to turn their trauma into ammunition. That's not healing. That's the opposite of healing. I know, Jiho said. He felt the weight of every decision, every order he gave that put his people through this. But if the Void Collective comes, if they come, these soldiers will be ready to fight. Hana interrupted. But at what cost? What happens to them afterward? What happens to their minds when we've trained them to deliberately inflict their worst thoughts on themselves? Jiho didn't have an answer. Meanwhile, the Concordat military planners worked with Yunji and Doyun to develop new tactical doctrines. If human minds could disrupt telepathic coordination, then human forces needed to be deployed in ways that maximized that disruption. Small units embedded with larger Concordat forces, boarding teams that could assault enemy ships without being mentally overwhelmed, forward scouts who could operate in Void Collective territory without being detected or assimilated. The strategies that emerged were ruthless in their logic. Humans would be the first into battle, the ones who confronted the enemy directly while telepathic forces provided support from behind. Humans would be the shield, and if necessary, the sacrifice. Minho accepted this without complaint. So did his soldiers. They were military personnel. They understood what it meant to be expendable. But Jiho saw what it was doing to them, saw how they became quieter, more withdrawn as the training intensified. The alarms started screaming at Oro 300 station time. Jiho jerked awake in his quarters, his mind instantly flooded with adrenaline. He was pulling on his uniform before he was fully conscious, running through the corridors toward the command center before his brain caught up with his body. The command center was chaos. Screens showed star maps with spreading red indicators. Concordat military personnel were shouting in multiple languages, their voices overlapping into incomprehensible noise. Velrith stood at the center of it all, her silver-blue skin dark with stress patterns, her three eyes locked on the main display. Report, Jiho demanded, pushing through to reach her. Border World Talus 7 went silent 12 minutes ago, Velrith said, her voice tight. Then Talus 6, then Talus 5. The entire system is dark now. No communications, no sensor readings, just silence. How many people? Jiho asked. 8 million on Talus 7 alone, Velrith said. All telepathic species. All connected to the Concordat network. The Void Collective, Jiho said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Velrith confirmed. They're here. Over the next 6 hours, 3 more systems went dark. Planets that had been home to billions of beings simply stopped responding. The Concordat fleet mobilized, but they were responding to an enemy they couldn't predict, couldn't track. Every time they thought they knew where the void was spreading, another system fell somewhere completely different. "They're not advancing linearly," Doyen said, studying the tactical maps. He had been pulled into the command center along with the rest of the human team. "They're jumping around, hitting multiple points simultaneously." "How are they doing that?" "Telepathic coordination on a massive scale," one of the Concordat strategists explained. He was an insectoid named Crix, one of the few who could tolerate working directly with humans. The Void Collective operates as a single mind across billions of bodies. They can coordinate attacks across light years instantly, without lag, without miscommunication. They are perfect unity. "Then we need to break that unity," Hana said. "Impossible," Crix clicked. "No one has ever disrupted the Collective's coordination. That is why they are unstoppable." "No one with telepathic minds has tried," Yunji corrected. "What about minds they can't coordinate with?" All eyes turned to the humans. The Concordat High Command made the decision within the hour. The main fleet would engage the Void Collective in the Talus system, trying to slow their advance. But a strike force, mixed Concordat and human ships, would attempt something unprecedented. They would board a Void Collective command vessel and try to disrupt it from within. Minho and his soldiers were ready within 30 minutes. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. But as Jiho watched them load into the assault ships, he saw the fear in their eyes. They were human. They were terrified. They just weren't letting that terror stop them. The jump to the Talus system took 4 hours. During the transit, Jiho tried to rest but couldn't. His mind kept spinning through scenarios, possibilities, fears. What if the theory was wrong? What if human minds were just as vulnerable to the Collective as telepathic ones? What if they were about to lose all these soldiers to an enemy that would turn them into mindless drones? When they dropped out of FTL, the battle was already raging. The Void Collective's ships were unlike anything Jiho had seen before. They were organic, pulsing things that looked grown rather than built. They moved with unnatural coordination, every vessel acting in perfect synchronization with the others. Against them, the Concordat fleet looked scattered, disorganized, despite their best efforts to coordinate. "Reading massive telepathic activity," the sensor officer reported. "The Collective is projecting a unified consciousness across the entire battle space. Concordat telepaths are reporting extreme mental pressure." Jiho looked at the tactical display and saw Concordat ships moving sluggishly, responding slowly to threats. The void was getting inside their minds, overwhelming them with the weight of billions of unified thoughts. "All human ships advance to assault positions," Jiho ordered. "Concordat vessels fall back and provide covering fire." "We're going in." The human ships pushed forward. They were smaller than the Concordat vessels, more maneuverable, and they had one critical advantage. The Void Collective couldn't predict them. Human tactical thinking was too chaotic, too illogical. Every time the Void anticipated a move, human commanders would do something different. Often something that made no strategic sense but somehow worked. Minho's assault ship targeted the largest Void vessel. What their intelligence suggested was a command node. The ship was massive, a pulsing mass of organic material that seemed to breathe as it moved through space. Getting close to it felt like approaching something alive and malevolent. "Breaching in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Jiho watched from his command ship, unable to do anything but observe. He saw Minho's ship punch through the Void vessel's hull, saw the soldiers pour out into alien corridors that flexed and pulsed like living tissue. "Minho, report," Jiho called over the comm. "We're inside." Minho's voice came back, distorted by interference. "Captain, this place is alive. The walls are moving. There are things in the walls watching us. I can feel the signal cut out, Minho," Jiho shouted. "Commander Minho, respond." Silence. Inside the Void command ship, Minho and his team advanced through nightmare corridors. The walls pulsed around them, and he could hear whispers in his mind. Not words exactly, but the sensation of words, the feeling of thousands of voices trying to speak all at once. "Stay focused," Minho ordered his team. "Remember your training." "Keep your minds loud," the soldiers obeyed. As they advanced, they deliberately recalled their training exercises, their traumatic memories, their contradictory emotions. They thought about everything at once: fear and courage, love and hate, hope and despair. They made their minds into storms of chaos. The effect was immediate. The whispers in Minho's head became confused, discordant. The walls around them stopped pulsing in rhythm and began to spasm irregularly. Things moved in the walls. Beings that had been assimilated by the collective absorbed into its unity. But now they were twitching, convulsing, as if the collective couldn't maintain its hold on them in the presence of such chaotic human thoughts. "It's working," one of the soldiers said, his voice awed and terrified. "They can't handle us." "Keep moving," Minho ordered. "Find the command node." They pushed deeper into the ship, following the strongest concentration of telepathic signals. Behind them, assimilated beings pulled themselves from the walls, trying to follow, but they moved sluggishly, uncoordinated. The collective's perfect unity was fragmenting in the presence of minds it couldn't absorb. Finally, they reached a chamber at the heart of the ship. It was enormous, pulsing with bioluminescent light. At the center floated a being, or what had once been a being. It was massive, bloated, its body merged with technological and organic components. Thousands of cables ran from it to the wall's floor ceiling. This was a node, a central coordination point for the collective, and it was aware of them. The mental pressure hit like a physical blow. Minho felt the collective's full attention focus on him, felt billions of unified minds trying to understand, to categorize, to assimilate. The void reached into his thoughts, trying to find coherence, trying to find a pattern it could match and absorb. But there was no pattern. Minho's mind was chaos. Memories of his dead brother mixed with joy at his daughter's birth, rage at injustices mixed with love for his unit, fear of death mixed with acceptance of it. He was contradictions wrapped in contradictions. Lies he told himself stacked on truths he denied. He was human, and that meant he was fundamentally incompatible with unity. The node began to scream. Not with sound, with thought. With telepathic agony that would have destroyed any telepathic being instantly. But humans weren't telepathic. They felt the pressure, felt something wrong in their heads, but they couldn't hear the scream the way a telepath would. "Hit it," Minho ordered. His soldiers opened fire. The node's physical form was surprisingly fragile once they started shooting it. Biological components burst and leaked. Technological elements sparked and exploded. The cables tore free from the walls, thrashing like dying snakes. And throughout the void ship, throughout the void fleet, coordination began to fail. Billions of minds that had been thinking as one suddenly found themselves unable to maintain unity. The presence of human thoughts in the command node was like poison spreading through a nervous system, disrupting signals, breaking connections. Void ships began moving erratically. Some collided with each other. Others simply stopped, drifting in space as the intelligence controlling them struggled to maintain coherence. "All ships advance," Jiho ordered from his command ship. "The void is disrupted. Hit them now while they're vulnerable." The concordate fleet surged forward. Without perfect coordination, the void collective was just ships and bodies. Dangerous still, but not unstoppable. The battle raged for another 2 hours, brutal and bloody. But the outcome was no longer certain. When it ended, when the last void ship either retreated or was destroyed, Jiho found himself staring at the casualty reports. 3 concordate vessels destroyed, 7,000 lives lost. And Minho's assault ship was barely functioning. The ceremony took place 2 months after the battle. Lumina Threshold had been repaired, its damaged sections rebuilt. But everyone who had been there during the void attack remembered the alarms, the fear, the feeling that the end had come. Now the Grand Council chamber was filled with delegates again, but the atmosphere was different. Wary, uncertain. Jiho stood on the central platform wearing his full dress uniform. Around him, the 12 species of the Concordate watched from their floating platforms. At the highest point, Velrith presided over the gathering, her silver-blue skin marked with new patterns that Hana said represented grief and respect among Etherans. "The Galactic Concordate recognizes humanity as a full-member species," Velrith announced, her voice resonating through the chamber and through every mind capable of hearing it. "Earth will have full access to our technology, our knowledge, our trade networks. Humanity will have a vote in council decisions and representation in all Concordate institutions. Welcome, humans. Welcome to the galaxy." There should have been celebration. There should have been joy. But Jiho saw the way the other delegates looked at the human contingent. He saw fear there, mixed with gratitude, mixed with something harder to name. The water-bearer, Counselor Thas, spoke next. Humanity has proven itself in battle. Human courage saved concordant worlds. Human sacrifice prevented the Void Collective from advancing further. We are grateful. But his liquid form churned uneasily as he spoke. Counselor Vex, the insectoid, clicked rapidly before speaking. Humanity has also proven to be dangerous. Human minds are weapons. Weapons we cannot predict, cannot control, cannot fully understand. We welcome humans as allies, but we must also recognize the threat they represent. Other delegates murmured agreement. A plant being spoke of how human soldiers' thoughts had caused lasting psychological damage to telepathic personnel who came too close. A crystalline being expressed concern about allowing humans access to sensitive concordant facilities when their minds could unconsciously project disruptive patterns. Jiho listened to it all with growing understanding. The concordant needed humans, but they were afraid of what humanity represented. Minds that operated outside their comprehension, thoughts that could harm without intending to, a species that was effective precisely because they were incompatible with everything the concordant knew. They were being welcomed and feared in the same breath. When the ceremony ended, delegates dispersed quickly. Few approached the human contingent to offer personal congratulations. Even those who did kept their distance, as if afraid of getting too close to human minds. So much for warm welcomes, Doyun muttered. Can you blame them? Hana asked. We literally hurt them just by thinking near them. And after what happened in the battle, after they saw what human soldiers could do to the Void's coordination, they know we're dangerous. We saved them, Yunji said, her voice hard with frustration. We did, Jiho agreed. And they're grateful. But gratitude and trust are different things. That evening, Velrith requested one final private meeting with Jiho. They met in her garden, sanctuary, among the impossible plants and gravity-defying water streams. Jiho had been here before, but it felt different now. More peaceful, maybe. Or maybe he was just different, changed by everything he had seen and done. You leave tomorrow? Velrith said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jiho confirmed. The diplomatic team is returning to Earth to report on everything that's happened. The military personnel are being reassigned to the new Joint Defense Force. The mind-blind vanguard, Velrith said, using the term that concordant military planners had coined. Humans who will serve as the first line of defense against telepathic threats. Is that really what we are? Jiho asked. Just weapons? Just tools to use against the Void? No, Velrith said firmly. She moved closer to him, her three eyes reflecting the bioluminescent light of the garden. You are people, Captain. People who have suffered and sacrificed. People who are brave and flawed and complicated. But you are also something unique in this galaxy. You are minds that exist in isolation, locked inside your own skulls, unable to truly share your thoughts with others. She reached out and touched his temple gently, a gesture of deep respect among Etherans. Jiho had learned that much during his time here. I have spent months studying your thoughts, Captain, Velrith continued, trying to understand how human minds work. And I still cannot fully map your consciousness. There are depths to you that I cannot reach, contradictions I cannot resolve. Every time I think I understand you, I discover another layer of complexity. Is that frustrating? Jiho asked. It is beautiful, Velrith said. Telepathic species share everything. We know each other completely. There are no secrets, no mysteries, no private spaces in our minds. But you humans, you are alone inside yourselves, forever separate, forever wondering what others truly think and feel. Yeah, Jiho said quietly. That's the human condition, always wondering, always guessing. Does it hurt? Velrith asked. That loneliness? Jiho thought about it. He thought about all the times he had wanted to truly know what someone else was thinking. His wife, before the divorce, wondering if she still loved him. His daughter, trying to understand if she was happy or just pretending. His soldiers trying to know if they trusted his leadership or just followed orders. Yes, he admitted. It hurts. We spend our whole lives trying to connect with each other, trying to bridge that gap between minds. Sometimes we succeed a little, sometimes we fail completely, but we keep trying anyway. Why? Velrith asked. If connection is so difficult, if you can never truly know another mind, why keep trying? Because the trying is what makes us human, Jiho said. Because even though we can't share thoughts directly, we can share experiences. We can build trust through time and action. We can learn to read each other through small signs, a tone of voice, a facial expression, a pattern of behavior. It's imperfect. It's incomplete. But it's ours. Velrith was silent for a long moment, and Jiho wondered what she was thinking. He would never know for certain. Even with all her telepathic power, there was still a gap between them, a space where understanding had to be built rather than simply transmitted. The Concordat Council voted this morning, Velrith said finally. We are establishing a permanent joint command structure, humans and telepaths working together. We will share our technology freely. We will train together, fight together. But there was much debate about the relationship. What kind of debate? Jiho asked. Some council members believe humans should be kept separate, restricted to military roles used as shields against the void, but not integrated into civilian society. They fear what might happen if humans move freely through Concordat space, disrupting telepathic communities just by existing. And what do you believe? Jiho asked. I believe fear is a poor foundation for alliance, Velrith said. I believe that humanity's differences make you valuable, not dangerous. But I also believe that this will be difficult. There will be incidents. There will be misunderstandings. Some telepaths will never be comfortable around human minds, and that is their right. So where does that leave us? Jiho asked. Building something new, Velrith said. An alliance between species who experience consciousness in fundamentally different ways. It has never been done before. It will be messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But perhaps that chaos is exactly what the galaxy needs. She smiled, and Jiho found himself smiling back. Captain Jiho, Velrith said formally. On behalf of the Galactic Concordat, I thank you for your service. You have helped save countless lives. You have proven that humanity has a place among the stars. And you have taught me something valuable. What's that? Jiho asked. That mystery can be as important as understanding, Velrith said. That not, knowing everything about another mind leaves room for wonder, for discovery, for continued growth. Telepaths know everything about each other immediately. But humans, you have to work to understand each other. And perhaps that work is what makes your connections meaningful. The next morning, Jiho stood in the docking bay with his team, preparing to board the shuttle that would take them back to Earth. Around them, the station bustled with activity. Concordat personnel and human soldiers moving through the same spaces, sometimes warily, sometimes with growing familiarity. Minho was there to see them off. He had recovered from his injuries. Though Hana said the psychological scars would take longer to heal, he stood straighter now, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had faced the worst and survived. Commander, Jiho said, take care of yourself, and take care of the others. Yes, sir, Minho said. Then, more quietly, Captain, did we do the right thing, turning ourselves into weapons? Jiho looked at the young commander, saw the doubt in his eyes, the weight of everything they had experienced. I don't know, Jiho admitted. I think we did what we had to do. Whether it was right or wrong, that's something we'll spend years figuring out. But you and your soldiers saved lives. Remember that when the doubt gets heavy. Minho nodded, not looking entirely satisfied but accepting the answer. The shuttle departed and Jiho watched through the viewport as Lumina threshold grew smaller. The station hung in space like a crystal flower, beautiful and alien and somehow familiar now.